With football trading, the stats that you use is what separates you from being a profitable trader and being a losing trader. In this video, I will share with you the 4 stat sites that I use the most, both for pre-match research and for in-play tracking on the football matches that I'm trading. A significant number of football traders won't do any pre-match research on the game they're trading. They'll simply jump into the market in play and be reactive to whatever is going on the pitch. Now, I'm not saying what is happening on the pitch isn't an important variable. In fact, it is the most important variable. Because no matter how much pre-match research you put into the game, if what you're seeing on the pitch isn't reflecting that research, you simply cannot implement your strategies. However, your opinion on the game that you're watching live needs to be backed up by your pre-match research in order for you to confidently enter a position into the market and make money in the long run. For example, last season, so that's the 2020 and 2021 season, if you was watching a Wolves match and they were playing terribly and they were 1-0 down at half time, you might think this is going to continue in the second half. They was offering nothing in the first half, so your position may be against Wolves or for the other team. However, if you look at the stats, you'll be able to see that Wolves typically did very poorly in the first half of games last season and performed much better in the second half. So given these statistics that you've looked at beforehand, you'll be able to think that maybe the position will be for Wolves, expecting them to be strong in the second half, which they typically are. So, without any further ado, here are the 4 stat sites that I most commonly use. Number 1, this is the main stat site that I use, and that is Soccer Stats. Soccer Stats is a very in-depth resource. To some extent, there's almost too much data on there, and you can get bogged down looking in stats which aren't really important for the grand scheme of the game and the grand scheme of your trading. However, when you focus in on just the important stats on the website, it can be such a valuable resource in order to determine which matches you should target and the opportunities you can try to exploit for profit. So I'm going to jump over onto my laptop and show you how I use Soccer Stats and the stats that I look for. This is the main display of the Soccer Stats website. A bit complicated to begin with. But to filter between the leagues, you've got this top bar up here. So primarily I'm going to be trading the English Premier League, which is the first England flag. So the season hasn't started yet, so I think it would be easy to select the previous season, that's 2020-2021. I'm not going to go into too much depth of what's here, I'm just going to briefly go over which stats I find useful. There isn't much on this homepage which I find particularly useful, except for maybe the goal times, which is just a breakdown of the times that goals are scored by 15-minute increments throughout the game. As you can see, the last 15 minutes, the highest frequency of goals, and the first 15 minutes, the lowest frequency of goals scored. And you also get an overview of the league table, as its current form is, which, as this is last season, this is the final table. So next, if we go to the Matches tab, it's filtered again for the present season, which starts this Friday. So obviously you've got the first game of the season, Brentford-Arsenal, and you can press this head-to-head button here. If we press this just shows you a breakdown of the 2 team stats. Obviously this is completely empty at the minute because the season hasn't started, but once the season starts and these 2 teams start playing games, this will start populating, which you can use to inform you of your strategies for the game. In particular on this, I do like to look at the, scroll down at the bottom, the goal time sections, which can then be filtered by home and away for each team. And this will show you a breakdown of how this team performs at home and how this team performs away throughout the season as a basis for your strategy. So I'm going to go and select last season to show you an example of what this looks like when filled out. So if we just select any of the teams, say Manchester United, scroll down, see a breakdown of the goals scored per 15 minutes. You can select that by home and away. So immediately looking at this, you can see that away from home they were very good in the first 30 minutes of the second half, and generally, to be honest, all of the second half they didn't concede many goals, which could be a potential strategy to look at for trading Manchester United games. So far we've looked at goal breakdowns over a 15-minute period, but Soccer Stats also allows you to view goal times over a 10-minute period. So to do that, we go to the timings, and here again it's showing you the 15-minute segments for each team. But if we scroll down, we get to goals scored and goals conceded per 10 minutes. So for example, the first number is the number of goals scored, and the second number is the number of goals conceded in each 10-minute segment of the match. Once again, this can also be filtered home and away, so you can be able to see which teams are strong in particular parts of the match, both home and away. Next up, I want to show you the first tab, and from this tab, if we scroll down a little bit, we get opening goals scored. This is useful for determining when teams score first in matches from this OGS section, and also the average minute for the goal. So what stands out for me here, for example, is like Leeds when they score first. It's very early in the game, 14 minutes in at home, but when you go away, they score more frequently away, but the average goal time is much further through the match at 44 minutes, which is why studying home and away form is so important, because the way a team performs at home is not always the way they'll perform away. If we scroll down on this same page, you also see this record when teams scored first. So again, this can be filtered home and away. And if we look at Arsenal, for example, when they score first at home, they go on to win all the time. At least last season they did. Compared to a team like Brighton, who when they score first, they only win 66% of the time. So that is something to consider when either backing or laying teams. For example, you want to lay Brighton if they score first, particularly early on in a game, but you would be a bit more conservative if Arsenal scored. As you can see, there is an abundance of stats that you can use on Soccer Stats. In this demonstration, I only showed you the stats that I most commonly use, but I do recommend going onto Soccer Stats yourself and having a look around and see which stats you can also use, which I didn't show in this video. And please feel free to leave a comment below for other stats that you think are important when sports trading. Coming in at number 2 is InfoGoal. Primarily I use this site as an in-play tracker, more specifically tracking XG. However, there is some pre-off information that you can gather from this website, which is also very useful. So let's have a look at InfoGoal. So on InfoGoal, normally all the matches of the day will be listed in this box here for today's matches. So you can select the match you're interested in. But because the Premier League hasn't started yet, there are no Premier League games here, so I'm going to show you some stats from last season. So I'll go to the top and select competitions, English Premier League, and filter it by season as last season. Here you'll see the league table, how it actually ended up from 1st to 20th, but you can also filter it by expected to show how well teams should have done compared to how they actually did. This is best visualised in this slope graph here, and as you can see, famously last season Brighton performed much worse than they was expected to perform based off XG alone, as based on XG they should have finished 5th in the league, where in reality they finished 16th. Obviously this shows to some extent how unlucky Brighton were, but also to some extent the limitations of XG as a metric, as that just could be something inherently wrong with Brighton, i.e. they struggle to finish chances, and regardless of how well their XG is in matches, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll go on to win games. This is why I use XG for just tracking momentum in a game, basically. I don't use it as a religious way of deciding if a team is going to win. I can just simply see which team is applying the most pressure, creating the most shots, and then consequently creating the most XG. Another good use for this site is checking to see if your position was bad or it was just unlucky. For example, if we select fixtures from November 28th from the previous season, we can see this game between Everton and Leeds. If you had an over 2.5 goals position on this game, you would in fact to some extent have been unlucky, as there was an XG of almost 5 goals in this game, where the game only finished 1-0. So this is why it's important to keep a level head when you lose, to think, was the position actually right and I was unlucky, or was the position completely wrong? The XG of a game can be broken down even further, so if we go into select a game, say this Man City and Burnley game, and press view shot map, you get a detailed breakdown of each shot in the game. The shots with a yellow circle around them indicate when the goal was actually scored. For example, if we click this one, this is Riyad Mahrez, 6 minutes into the game, at a probability of 34%, which led to a goal. But then if you look at this one here, a much smaller probability shot by Benjamin Mendy only resulted in a 6% probability of scoring, but it went in. This is just a simple way to indicate how well a team's actually performing. If a team's ranking up a bit of XG, but all their shots are coming from outside the box, then maybe those shots on target stats don't look as appealing as they do when you first see them. So as I mentioned, I mostly use InfoGoal to track the game in play. So I would already have done my pre-match research on Soccer Stats, and once the game has gone in play, I'll be checking the XG of the game to see if what I thought would happen before the game is actually transpiring on the pitch. Because if it isn't, then this is a market that I shouldn't be entering. So Site 3 is also another in-play resource, and that site is called SofaScore. I practically only use SofaScore for one purpose, and that is the attack momentum functionality on the website. So let's jump over to my laptop and I'll show you what the attack momentum function is and how to use it. Okay, so this is SofaScore's website. Right here will be where all the games of the day are listed. I'm going to open up the West Ham and Man City game from the previous example to show you the attack momentum function. So I'm going to search Manchester City, and I'm going to go previous all the way up to the 28th of November that game was played on. Right here. And then this right here is attack momentum. So the attack momentum graph is broken into two halves. The top half, the green half, represents the home team, in this case Manchester City, and the bottom half, the blue half, represents the away team, in this case Burnley. Each individual bar in the graph represents 1 minute of game time, and the grey line in the middle there represents the half-time mark. The height of the bar represents the team's momentum. The higher the bar, the more attacking pressure the team is applying to the opposite team. I've highlighted where each of the 5 goals in this game went in, to show if they were against a run of play or were after a sustained period of attacking momentum. I do like to use this function to check how lively a game is before entering a position. I especially like doing this if I'm unable to watch a game for whatever reason, or I've missed a part of the game before starting to watch. One other game I would like to show you on SofaScore is the Chelsea and Manchester United game in the Premier League from the 24th of October last season. As you can see here, pretty much nothing happened in the first 20 minutes of this game. There was barely any attacking momentum for either team. And if you look more closely for the rest of the game, there wasn't really any significant sustained phases of attack momentum for either side. And lo and behold, the game finished 0-0. And finally, the last site that I use is called Flash Scores. I use this site to check the live scores of the current matches that I could be trading. Flash Scores update the live score pretty quickly, and that is good because Betfair and other traditional media sites like BBC Sport and Sky Sports can have a several minute delay for when the goal goes in to when the site is updated. However, Flash Scores is one of the most up-to-date resources that I can find. Sometimes I will also use Bet365 purely to check the scores of the games, as that also updates fairly quickly. I use this site because you cannot afford to be a minute behind the live score. In particular for strategies which rely on reacting to when goals immediately go into the game, whether that's putting a lay bet in or a back bet in if the updated price doesn't match what you think the price should be. These have been the 4 stat sites that I most frequently use. There's one thing that I'd like to add. I also use Twitter quite often to check injuries, players returning from injury, players being injured, because that affects the price of the markets pre-off as well. Only one of these sites was for pre-match research, and that was Soccer Stats. I think that site is so in-depth that you don't need any other resources really. Infogol does help as well, but I think the stats are also covered on Soccer Stats really. The remaining stats were tools to help you trade in play, to be used in conjunction with watching the game live. I do recommend watching the game live, even with the amazing amount of stats sites you can use and live tracking you can watch on games now, because watching live you get a better opinion than what stats simply show on screen. Let me know in the comment section down below any other stat sites that you use, or any individual stats that you think are really helpful to use when trading. Thank you for watching this video.